Are you in the market for a brand new electric car? Yes? Then come closer. Have I got news for you? Our friends at the CCAN Action Fund are giving away 3 brand new EVs as a part of their 8th annual Raffle for the Planet fundraiser. That means 3 winners. If you've been looking for a chance to drive off in a brand new electric vehicle, this is it. The first place winner will drive off in a brand new Rivian, Lucid, or Porsche EV. The second place winner will drive off in a highly anticipated Rivian R2 or one of the Hyundai Ioniq lineup or the very fun Volkswagen ID Buzz. The third place winner will get a Chevrolet Bolt, and they even cover state and federal taxes.
So they only sell 10,000 tickets, and right now less than 4,000 are sold, so those are fantastic odds.
It's only $200 per ticket. So go ahead and get yours now. To enter, go to www.ebraffle.org. Pause this video right now and go to www.ebraffle.org and enter to win. Or you can go down in the show notes and find the link down there.
All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome back to Out of Spec Bits. I'm Max, a former full-time contributor to the channel, Polestar owner and enthusiast, with Nathan, another Polestar owner and enthusiast here. Hello.
Hello. How are you doing?
Doing all right.
Sitting in your Polestar 3.
I'm in my 3, which I think you used to have, right? But you drive a 4 now?
Yeah, that's right. I've had a 2, a 3, and a 4 now.
Okay, you were probably on track to get a 5 until today's news.
I had been pressuring them to bring it to the States unsuccessfully.
Yes. Let's just bite the bullet here. Unfortunate news. You may remember seeing a few weeks ago, Volvo got an exemption to the U.S. Department of Commerce's rules, which basically were going to ban partially Chinese-owned companies with quote-unquote connected vehicles from the States. So Volvo got that exemption. That did not happen for Polestar, and they could, in theory, fight it, but it seems like they're deciding it's not worth it, and they are leaving the U.S. market.
Yeah, I don't see them fighting it, mainly because I think if you take it from the perspective of Geely, that owns both of them, there's a risk if they push back on not getting the waiver for Polestar, and that there's a review, and then they could ultimately, it's not necessarily about both gaining access. They could review and say, okay, both don't get access, and that would be a huge hit to Volvo and Geely to lose access to the U.S. market. So I think Polestar is probably going to take, the U.S. unfortunately wasn't a big market to begin with for them. So, they're going to take this as it is.
Yeah, that's true. And let's disentangle this just a little bit for people who may not be as familiar with the Polestar brand as we are. I was on, I don't think you were there, but I was on with I believe Tom and Andreas a few months ago when Polestar announced a model offensive, which is still very much the plan for the rest of the world, but that included some US models, right? They were going to build a refreshed Polestar 2. The Polestar 5 was coming to the US. The Polestar 7 was going to be a Volvo XC40 sort of crossover thing. And that is all, none of that's happening in the US right now. As you and I know, the Polestar 3 is actually built and assembled in Bridgeville, South Carolina, for the entire world right now. They don't know what's going on with that at the moment, but they actually just moved production for the entire world there. That's also where Volvo EX90 is made. Polestar 4, which you drive, I believe, for the US market, those are assembled in South Korea.
That's right.
And so just rewinding a little bit, with the Polestar brand, I know a lot of people ask, I've talked to Kyle about this before, why did Geely ever decide, as they acquired Volvo, to really separate Polestar and Volvo in the first place? Can we untangle that a little bit?
Yeah, they've said in the past that their official reasoning is that they wanted to move and have a more of a performance and design-oriented brand in Polestar, and sort of the traditional, not that Polestar is not safe, but the more like family and safety oriented brand of Volvo. In reality, this is not confirmed, but sort of my suspicion is that, at the time when EVs were really starting to come to the forefront and they were trying to develop the US market, there was a limitation on federal incentives that would go to a buyer or someone leasing, and that was based on production limits. So I think they were trying to get around that a little bit by creating 2 separate legal entities in Polestar and Volvo. so they could kind of double up on the number of vehicles they could sell under that scheme. And then that scheme went away anyway.
Yeah.
And by that time, the train had already left the station. Polestar was already kind of rolling out as a separate entity, so they've stuck with it. But yeah.
Yeah, definitely they've had a rough go of it. And to give credit to the Polestar folks in the US in particular, they have endured some other challenges as well. They launched the 2, right? Their first really mass market vehicle after the extraordinarily cool carbon fiber, hybrid Polestar 1,
Yep.
which Kyle's got one, very cool, rare car, but the 2 was their first mainstream car. They launched that in the midst of, I think, the pandemic around that time. And also the tariff situation changed. People, we'll talk about the political element of this. And obviously, this administration has a lot of feelings about China. That's actually a bipartisan thing in the US that had already started. And so tariffs already got higher than Polestar and Volvo, I think, were expecting shortly after they launched the 2, which really derailed their business plans, to be honest. And from there, we've seen a story of them constantly adapting, and in some ways globally, right? Like in Europe, doing quite well. In China, not going well. They're not competing. And now in the US, they've just backed out entirely.
Yeah, I think to back to your point about, so when the Polestar 2 first came out, it was the only model that, other than the Polestar 1, we'll set aside the Polestar 1 because that was such a small volume vehicle. So that the Polestar 2 was really the only vehicle that they were carrying. Then the Polestar 3 was was coming online, and then that's when the original sort of tariffs hit for the Polestar 2. And so the Polestar 2 left the US market, and it was just the Polestar 3 for quite a while. The Polestar 4 was supposed to come, then because of the tariffs, that was delayed until they could move production to South Korea. And then now we're at a point where we're kind of going back to, I think their only real option would have been, and we can get into this a little bit more, was to stick with the Polestar 3 to hold out for maybe the revised Polestar 2 and the Polestar 7. But I don't think they wanted to do that. I think they were, again, thinking from Geely's perspective, they were viewing the US market for what it is, and that it's, the EV market is slowed a little bit, and they don't want to step on the toes of Volvo, which is, I think, their primary interest in the US.
Right.
So yeah, I just think they didn't want to get stuck with just a Polestar 3 for sort of an indefinite period of time.
Yeah, even just selling the 3 and 4, as has been the status quo for the last few months, I think has been awkward for the brand, right? Because the 2 is still a global product. They still sell a refreshed version of the Polestar 2, and it may not be the most bleeding edge vehicle around, but they refreshed it. It's totally fine, right? And it's maybe their most accessible entry point, their highest volume seller. That just hasn't existed in the US for like a year. So they were already in an awkward position. I think this just put them in a even more niche position. It's unfortunate, though. I'll just say, like, being in a Polestar 3, having experienced this car, well-documented issues with it. All the same, it is a fantastic car once it's, working, dialed in. Similar story with Volvo and their struggles with the EX90, like fantastic software platform, funnily enough, one that's, powered in many ways by Android and Google services, all of that. And yet this Department of Commerce ruling, I guess, is suspicious of the Chinese ownership. Is it the software? Do we really know the details of why Commerce is saying this is suspicious?
Yeah, so there's 3 implementation phases for this. So the first one is regards to model year 2027, and that one is specifically for software. So it's relates to telematics software and autonomous driving or driver support software. So that's what's hitting here. And so we can assume there are only 2 models, that one of those 2 models, and I suspect it's the 4, because the EX90 is going to continue to sell, and the EX90 and the 3 are functionally the same underneath the skin. Yeah. And we'll come back to that in a second. But and then I think it's in 2029, there's a hardware limitation on non-communicating pieces of hardware in the car. And then 2030, model year 2030, there is a full stop on anything that has hardware from ties to China or to Russia. So I wonder if 2030 we're going to kind of be back in this, and there's going to maybe be some issues with some of the existing Volvos, or if there's enough time for them to sort of retool and get suppliers from different locations for at least for the U.S. Volvos.
Yeah, that's a good point. And when you think about foundationally how Polestar builds their vehicle, it is a bit of all of their vehicle lineup. It's a bit of a head scratcher because each one of them sort of has a bespoke platform, in most cases borrowed from somewhere else in Geely Group. So like Polestar 1, I think was very, very loosely derived from Spa. And then they, adapted the heck out of it to make that plug-in hybrid powertrain. Polestar 2 was adapted from the CMA platform, which the XC40 Recharge was on. And that was actually, for its time, pretty good, compact modular platform. Served that car well. They've updated it since then globally. Then there's the Spa 2 platform, which is where things, I think, started to really get off the rails in the sense of that was probably the worst platform launch in Volvo's history, and it affected Polestar as well. Like very ambitious core compute, platform, very ahead of its time in many ways, and maybe somewhat dialed in now. I would say it works pretty well, but as we all know, when it launched, it had horrific quality control issues, mostly down to software and electronics, which they had a really hard time taming. Then there's Polestar 4, which you have, and I understand that works a lot better. However, there's the issue. It uses the SEA platform, which is Geely. It's Chinese derived, and I imagine it's self-driving features as opposed to the Polestar 3, which is, I know it's an NVIDIA chip, and I don't know if they're licensing from Mobileye or how it works, but in the case of the 4, right, that's kind of a more Polestar developed system, maybe potentially one that Geely has its hands in.
Yeah, you're exactly right. So that was where I was going to go back to. I think the thing that we can look at is sort of what's played out over time or the past few months is that back in March, if you remember, Volvo announced that they were going to pull the EX30 from the U.S. market, and they played that as it's just hasn't been a very big seller in the U.S. But by the way, we're going to keep selling it in Canada and Mexico. And I was like, well, it didn't seem like it was that bad of a seller in the U.S. And for sure, I guess we could look what the numbers were, but I feel like we sell more EX30s in the U.S. than in Canada or in Mexico. So it seemed a little odd for them to pull that one out. And then it was, in May, as you said earlier, that the announcement that they had gotten the waiver to the connected vehicle rule. I think part of it was the EX30 was non-compliant. And so they needed to drop that out of the lineup to have compliance for the waiver. I think Polestar was presented with this very same issue because of the Polestar 4 being on the same platform as the EX30. And with no real way to get around making it compliant, and they can't drop that car because again, they only have the 2 in the market currently. That was a tough, or maybe not such a tough decision to then say, okay, Polestar out of the U.S. market, we can't get a waiver.
Right. And overall, I think the U.S. market was like 6% of Polestar sales. So this was a tough, pretty limited market for them. I wouldn't be surprised if Volvo EX30, even in its short and troubled life, sold more than there have been Polestar 3s and 4s, right? That was really a volume model. But yeah, completely, I think that was the SEA architecture as well, but a smaller version of it. So a very, also Chinese derived platform. As I understand, the Polestar 5, completely Polestar bespoke, developed in the United Kingdom, but presumably the tech and electronics were somewhat shared between the Swedish and the Chinese teams working on that car. So just a lot of entangled, complicated things. Polestar continues to be a global brand. I think their strategy is very interesting because, there's a lot of prognosticating of folks of like, oh my gosh, Polestar, I've never heard of them, so niche. They kind of do enjoy this ability to both be funded by Geely and share a lot of technology. So they actually don't have that many assets in R&D they have to maintain. So in some ways, this is maybe a cleaner exit than we've seen for other EV brands in the US.
Right.
Nonetheless, it is tricky because, there's folks like you with 4s out here. There's some people like me with 3s, and there's a lot of people with Polestar 2s in the U.S. So the question many of them may be tuning in, maybe asking is like, what's going to happen to me? As I understand it, they've said they will continue to service, provide warranty support, all that through their service points for existing owners, right?
Yeah, and I don't see really any reason for that to change, even from the perspective of those partner dealerships, the Volvo dealers, because now at this point they've got Polestar owners or people who are leasing the vehicles, who they need to go to them for servicing and support. And at the end of the day, when that lease, a large portion of the Polestars in the U.S. are leases, when those leases are up, well, here's a shiny new Volvo right over here in our dealership that's about as close as you're going to get to, your old Polestar.
Right.
So they're not. I can't imagine that they're going to want to, again, as dealer and dealer networks, that they're going to want to, kind of cast off those clients.
Yeah, I mean, their workshop and their technicians are using many of the same tools and parts to service many of these cars. Maybe the 4 is a bit more of an interesting case, since that car is kind of more unique in some ways. I've always thought it's really sad as well that like the Volvo ES90, gorgeous large sedan, we never got that here.
I am hopeful that maybe now we'll get it, because I'm curious.
Yeah, because now they don't have to compete with Polestar at all.
They don't have to compete with Polestar on it. They moved the Polestar 3, as you mentioned earlier, the Polestar 3 production that was going on in China. They've moved that to South Carolina. So will they move all of SPA 2 / SPA 2.5, if you want to call it that, to the Ridgeville, South Carolina plant, and then maybe we could get ES90s. I don't know. There's not really strong interest for sedans, so.
Yeah, as we're recording this, Volvo and Polestar executives are probably talking right now, figuring out exactly what they do here, because there are many moving parts to coordinate. I do think we saw the launch of the Volvo EX60 happening right now globally. I think the U.S. shipments are going to happen very soon. That's SPA 3. That's an all new iteration of their premium platform, and that looks very compelling. It seems like it's really dialed in. Seems like they have some cost advantages in making it. One can hope and presume that maybe Polestar globally can use that platform as well. However, we don't know their plans. So as a big Polestar enthusiast, serial Polestar owner, what are your thoughts on the direction of the brand as Volvo continues to do its own thing in the US and Polestar is now, more than ever kind of a European brand?
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, I think they kind of always were that. But in the U.S., I do wonder if part of the movement from, as you mentioned, the EX60 is on the SPA 3 platform, and sort of the underpinnings now of the EX90 and what will be the everywhere else Polestar 3 will share a lot of those underpinnings, the motors, the batteries, and a lot of the other things. I wonder if the changes to those were motivated for the EX90 and the Polestar 3, other than the issues that they had early on, were driven partly by this rule that they needed to get those two cars to be compliant in the US. There were some other hardware things that needed to be done to achieve that. And it's going to turn out the EX90 is the only one that's going to continue here. But globally, I mean, as you mentioned, the revised Polestar 2 and the Polestar 7 are still set to come out. I think maybe the only thing we see change from Polestar in a global perspective is, what do they do with that plant in Busan in South Korea now? That was my understanding, was that was completely built, like that was built out for Polestar. They leased line space from Renault at that facility explicitly to sell cars into the US. So now do they shift production of the Polestar 4 and the Polestar 4 wagon into China for the European market and for other markets? Or what do they do with that? Because I can't imagine that, it's cost effective to maintain that, renting out space at that plant at this point. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, luckily, it does seem like, that's a lease. And in many ways, I think that represents Polestar being a pretty asset-light brand. So I imagine they'll have to continue, to lean on their design, driving dynamics, the kind of IP that they actually do bring that's pretty valuable. Though it interestingly seems like the Asian markets, at least in China, really don't appreciate, because Polestar, do they even sell cars in China anymore?
I think I'm trying to remember. I think they no longer do. I think they closed the last of their dealerships there. But they're not the only ones. A lot of the European brands, or European type brands, as Polestar might be, have had trouble in China against the domestic brands.
Yeah, which is fascinating, because a lot of people, I think, surface level look at Polestar, they look at the Geely ownership, and they just assume, oh, wow, these are just like Chinese skin vehicles. It's their way of bringing Chinese cars globally. You could say at the margins, perhaps, but you and I both know, looking at Polestars, they're basically European vehicles funded with Chinese money, which have very unique sensibilities that make them in some ways a pretty bad fit for certain auto markets, because they're expensive. They are not necessarily the most efficient cars in their class. They have characteristics that make them really nice and premium that you and I love about them, but they've always been a niche brand, and today's news just really seems to confirm that.
Yeah, it's disappointing, and I'm curious to see what comes in the future in terms of Volvo offerings. Like we were saying, maybe the ES90 now is an option for us.
I assume you're leasing your Polestar 4, right?
We are leasing our Polestar 4, but we will have it now for another about 2.5 years or something like that. So
similar for my 3 here. It's a 27-month lease. I'll be up in May of 28. So we'll have to see what the market.
I think we're on the same timeline. I think that's when ours is up as well.
Yeah, I mean, so let's we have a few more minutes here. What do you think? Personally, I'm looking at now, I love the Polestar brand, love the Scandi aesthetic and the dynamics. EX60 cross country, maybe I'm thinking that's kind of the mid-sized best comparison, the Polestar 3. I don't really know what else will be available in the market for folks, like you were saying, right? Going to the Volvo dealer, what do they get to replace their flashy Polestar that they, maybe it's been problematic for them, but we know many people love the brand, even despite some of their growing pains and software issues.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. The EX60 cross-country version that is forthcoming is probably the closest, in format and function to the Polestar 3 that will be available to us later on. But it doesn't have quite the flash to it, I guess, as the 3.
I love the air suspension, but it'll have the Bowers and Wilkins sound system, all the creature comforts. I don't think it'll be tuned to drive like the 3, but yeah. No,
I don't think so. That is the biggest thing I miss from the Polestar 3 and the Polestar 4 is that Bowers and Wilkins sound system. It's sorely missed. I was hoping somewhere down the line we were going to get a Polestar 4 that would have a Bowers and Wilkins option, but at least we won't. So we'll have to see. Right. But yeah, I don't know where we'll be. May 2028 is a ways out from now, and there could be a lot more options from not just Volvo, but from other brands that might be of interest.
Absolutely. I do think there's a lot of crossover, especially between the more safety conscious Scandi folks who like Volvo and Polestar, but with Rivian actually, because similar software first approach, maybe less focus on the driving stuff and more on the outdoorsy lifestyle. But like you look at the interior, like Rivian's, and I think I see a lot of similar kind of minimalist leanings, because I know myself, just being spoiled with like that Polestar Volvo experience, I'd have a hard time going into something like a new, I don't know, Toyota BZ or anything that's honestly like not a Tesla or a Rivian, because the software experience in so many other cars is just busy and kind of a mess. And like I know Polestar has its issues, but I think it's important for me like to just clarify as an owner, I think they've done maybe the most tech forward take on software for their cars. Sometimes that's not always to their benefit, but I think it's pretty cool that like, oh, they have this touchscreen that integrates everything, app control, phone is key. They were super early to that. And from what I hear about Lucid owners, it seems like it at least works more reliably than that. So, maybe not quite as far ahead in the software game as Tesla and Rivian, but leaning on Google, it really seems like Volvo in particular and Polestar, derivatively from that, have gotten a lot out of that partnership. And that seems like it's going to continue.
Yeah, I think you touched on something that really is going to get lost from our market is Polestar and the Android automotive operating system. The way that they implement it is probably the most pure form of it.
Yeah.
And even the Volvo version is a little bit more skinned and more Volvo menu driven in a way. And nobody else who uses AAOS has it quite in the same way. So like Cadillac isn't quite as directly AAOS, set up as Polestar. And I think it's because they were one of the first ones. They just, like, by nature of having that partnership early on, that's the result. So yeah,
and even
I'll miss that. I will miss that a lot.
Yeah, I like Google showed off with the new Gemini integration that like that's coming first to the Volvo EX60. So like lots of things that have really been closely tied into that DNA. And I know many folks in GM vehicles can attest to this. Those newer vehicles don't have CarPlay. I'm one of these weirdos where like I absolutely get being an EV early adopter why you need a good native built-in system, and I appreciate cars that have it. I also like using CarPlay for certain things. I know that makes me a heretic in certain communities.
No CarPlay here. I don't use CarPlay. But another one is like, you mentioned Gemini, but also they released Google Live Lane guidance first to the Polestar 4. That was the first car to have it. And,
fascinating. Yeah.
So those sorts of things we won't get to experience firsthand, I guess.
I suppose not, but like, it's a very niche thing, given that like now it seems the brands that are decidedly software first have decided we're not doing phone mirroring at all. And here was at least Volvo still, I guess, carrying the torch of like, no, we'll just give consumers the choice. I think that's really cool. I am curious when we see the next generation efforts from Ford, if they go down that direction as well, because obviously General Motors is probably the most prominent legacy automaker to decide, no, we're going all in on Google, and we're not letting you use anything else, including phone mirroring. So we'll have to see. But like you said, May 28, that's a long time from now. I think we'll have to see what the market is. I'm definitely eyeing the residual, I'll say personally, on my lease, which is like, it sits at $39K, and that's marginal because, it's a lot of car for that money, assuming it keeps working. But also, I imagine for that money, there'll be other good stuff on the market by then, especially used.
Well, Max, I definitely made some calls earlier this morning when I heard this news around to see if there were any Polestar 3s that were of the spec that we like. And to see, can I grab one real quick before they go away?
Yeah, I mean, it now might be the time to add one to your collection, although you and I may know, and we should caution people watching, some of those used third-party ones you see that aren't Polestar inventory, they still have a warranty, but one of the reasons they may be sold used is because they were a lemon unit. There were several of those, which people have had many frustrations with. It is so weird. Like, I know this happens in cars, but Polestar 3 and EX90 were probably the most extreme example of this. There were so many people who had such long, so many issues. Here I am in my demo car that I leased, and I knew it already had 5,000 miles on it. It's worked, fingers crossed, so far pretty darn well. Like, I've needed to restart the software once or twice to fix some bugs, but I've never had it, not drive or not charge. So it's so interesting how these reliability things are kind of like hit or miss, and I don't know. It's sad because I feel like they kind of started to figure it out at last for the 3 in particular, just as it was taking off, and the Polestar 4, of course, going in that new direction, but no longer for the US.
Yeah, if we'd had the opportunity to get that, refreshed version with all the new hardware and everything like that, it would have made probably a pretty decent difference.
Perhaps, yeah, and I think they would have needed to keep incentivizing it. I will selfishly just say I like that the older car still has that torque vectoring axle in the rear. That's something the new car was going to give up, and as well as slightly larger battery, maybe offset by better efficiency, but also U.S. market, we have a lot of superchargers, and as I understood it, that new high voltage model was not going to have the most capable booster, so it might actually charge worse on 400 volt. I think this is the car that the U.S. is stuck with for now, and now there'll be no more new ones imported as of today, I guess.
Yep, whatever's on the ground here, or maybe is on a ship for in case of the Polestar 4s. But that's it.
Yes, and my thoughts, of course, any Polestar communications people or folks in Ridgeville, South Carolina, I'm hoping everyone finds, new placements or assignments. I imagine, as we were discussing, right, they can find things to do with those assets, because having a U.S. manufacturing plant for final assembly is no small thing. And I imagine Volvo, at least, will definitely want to leverage that still. I'm hoping find a way to do that. They minimize the amount of people affected by this news. I mean, it's tough in the EV industry overall. Even Rivian launching R2 has cut some positions, as is Lucid. So this is really crunch time right now. The products have never been better, and yet the market in the US is so tough, and it's scale time. So we're in tough season right now.
Yeah, and I think it's worth pointing out that for that Ridgeville facility, I mean, they haven't even been building any Polestar 3s for the US market for a little while now. We've been sort of filtering through the remnants of the 2025, still trying to sell those off while there are 2026s that were being sold into Europe. So,
yeah, would you recommend someone snap up a new inventory 3 if they want a deal?
If they haven't, well, that's what I was talking about earlier when I was making calls. There are still some out there. I think there's like maybe 400 or something like that, various configurations. But if you can, because the biggest issue that I had and that a lot of owners had in the past was with the onboard charger, the GHCA, and I think they've resolved that with again, unfortunately, right toward the end, but with the latest hardware, the latest onboard charger, and with the latest software combo. So if you can get it, you might be in a good spot for that.
Yeah, could be a great car. Still will be expensive to maintain, but hey, the warranty support, I guess, theoretically transfers, though. Maybe worth reading the fine print on that.
Who knows how fast they're going to try to liquidate everything if they're trying to really get out of the market in a hurry. And they're already heavily incentivizing them. So if they really want to move them, there might be some other incentives that are coming down the line.
Perhaps. And I'm selfishly hoping maybe when residual buyout time comes around, they're like, please don't give this back to us. We're going to take a huge loss on it. Here's the $10,000 discount. And then I'm like, okay, that's my dream scenario. We'll see whatever holding company or Volvo Financial, whatever they decide to do.
Yep.
But, many months between now and then. Thanks for joining me, Nathan. And I'm looking forward to hearing all the feedback from folks on what they think, especially if you're Polestar owners as well. Do you have a 4? Do you have a 3? Do you have a 2? Let us know what you think in the comments. And thanks for tuning in to Out of Spec Bits.